I really wanted the gameplay footage for this Wizardry video to be a triumph. And for about the first 40 minutes, everything was going perfectly. Well, maybe not perfectly, but good enough. I was about 200 experience points away from leveling up and getting out of that first level death trap. And then I got surprised by a group of large enemies, failed to run away from them, and was immediately surprised by a second group of large enemies, and then couldn't run away from them. It was a party wipe, which in Wizardry basically means time to start over from the beginning. So instead of a triumphant tale of me getting through one of the biggest challenges in computer RPGs, it's a cautionary tale and a good explanation of why I've always had so much trouble getting into Wizardry. Wizardry was the first big computer RPG hit. Its first-person dungeons and its reliance on party design became a standard for RPGs in the 80s. The games also gained a reputation for being unrelentingly difficult, though the first game is probably the easiest of the traditional ones. Your first step is building a party of 6 characters. Characters are created in the training grounds at the edge of town. But before you create anybody, you have an important decision to make. Good or evil? When you create your characters, you need to decide if they're going to be good or evil. And good characters can't be in parties with evil characters. Neutral characters can't get a healer, and that's a major problem, especially in the early game. Good characters have access to a few more advanced classes, while evil characters are free to kill anyone they come across in the maze. The next decision to make is what race your character is going to be. This decision determines your base stats. Humans have the lowest total points, but they only have a real deficit in piety, which is used for priest spells. Along with those base stats, you get a certain number of bonus points that you can apply to them. How many bonus points is random. Usually it's between 5 and 9, but very occasionally you'll get some extra points. If I was sitting down to do this seriously, I would re-roll my characters over and over again until I got at least 15 bonus points. As it stands, there's only 2 characters in my initial party that had excess points. You have to increase your stats to at least the baseline level for a class. All of the classes have certain stat requirements, and as your characters level up and gain stats, you'll be able to switch between classes. It's an important technique for being able to develop a well-rounded party. For this video, I went with a dwarf samurai, human fighter, dwarven priest, hobbit thief, elf bishop, and elf mage. My plan was that the bishop would provide additional clerical support, but that just didn't work out. In town proper, we can set up the party at the tavern. At the equipment shop, you can get your starting loadout. You might want to pool some gold around, which brings all of the money to one character. Wizards don't need a lot of starting cash, and that can be used to buy better equipment for other people. In fact, you could just make a bunch of characters, pool their gold to other people, then delete those characters again. Basically, using character creation to gain a ton of money at the start. I didn't do it here, but it's a useful trick to be aware of. The inn is the most useful building in town. You can pay some money to slowly get hit points back, but this is a really bad idea. It's expensive, and also your characters age. They start out at 14 years old, and both time and dungeon effects will age them up. Eventually, they'll start feeling the ravages of time. So instead of healing that way, sleep one night in the stable, and that reveals how much XP you need for the next level, as well as let you recover all of your spells. The final building in town is my least favorite, the temple. If a character dies or gets a permanent status effect afflicted on them, you can pay at the temple to undo it. It costs 250 gold per level to revive a character from the dead, and they age a year in the process. That's pretty expensive in the early game, so if a character dies at level 1 or 2, you probably just want to delete them and start over. Healing other status effects is less expensive, but it's still pretty pricey. Now we head for the edge of town, and there's a couple more things to point out. Leaving the game saves all of the current data. It's useful for when you needed to wrap some stuff up in town and then are going to quit for the night. TurboFile can save your data to an external device that ASCII sold. It even has Wizardry branding. There is a battery save for Wizardry, and it can hold about 20 characters. Finally, restarting an out party lets you pick up from characters that were out in the dungeon when you turn the game off. Wizardry autosaves a lot. It does this so you can't just hit reset when a character dies. Finally, Maze puts us into the dungeon. And when you enter the dungeon, you automatically start in the camp menu. It's accessed by pressing B as you're wandering around. From the camp menu, you can inspect your characters, and that's where you can cast spells on your own party. An absolutely vital tactic is retreating to the first floor stairs, healing your party up with spells, then popping into town and letting the priest sleep for a night in the stables, then going back into the maze and healing up with the spells again. When you exit this menu, you can start walking around and exploring the area. And at level 1, you do not want to wander far from these steps. A party at level 1 might survive a combat, and might. So after every fight, you need to retreat and fully recover. When you encounter enemies, you might not realize what they are initially. They'll just be shadowy figures. At the end of every round, there's a chance you'll identify what it is you're fighting. Combats are more likely to occur when you pass through a door, and there's some that are scripted to occur in particular places, though what that combat would be is randomly determined. Your ultimate goal in Wizardry is to descend through all 10 levels of the dungeon and defeat the wizard Wordna, which would be Andrew spelled backwards. The game is pretty much entirely focused on dungeon exploration. There isn't a story to follow or complex puzzles to work out. You're just searching the dungeon, kicking in doors, and killing the inhabitants. In a fight, only the first 3 members of your party are able to engage with the enemy. They're the only ones who can select Fight. If you're facing undead, then the priest can select Dispel, and they have a chance to destroy any undead instantly. Outside of melee range, you have to pick Parry, or you could cast spells. The spells in Wizardry all have fanciful names that don't really tell you what they do. It's intended that you'd refer to them in the manual to understand them, but these days you can just use a strategy guide. After killing those dungeon inhabitants, they often leave behind a treasure chest. And treasure chests are almost always trapped. The thief can inspect them to determine what type of trap they have. That's also something that can be done with a spell when you get to higher levels. Then they can try to disarm that trap. That's 2 checks that they have to pass for each treasure chest. 1 to correctly identify, 1 to disarm. And if they screw up, it's very likely fatal. So if they can't identify the trap, or if they say they can't disarm it, just let it go. You don't want to trigger it. So getting back to my party wipe, I did the only thing I could think of, and turned the game off. And fortunately, I did it before the game saved the data. I was able to restart my out party, and pick it up right from the square where I had my fatal encounter. From there I could make it back to town to recover, and I got to level up. Leveling up occurs when you stay at an inn, and it's one of the more annoying things in Wizardry, because it randomly determines which stats go up, and sometimes they go down. Hit point gain is totally random, and even what spells you get is randomized. It doesn't take a lot of bad rolls to screw up a character in Wizardry, and if it happens, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Something you might have noticed as I've been playing is that the game is entirely in English. In fact, the Japanese version of Wizardry has complete Japanese and English text in it. From the main menu, you can go here and just change all of the options from Japanese to English. On the computer, Wizardry did well in the 80s and early 90s. Wizardry 2 and 3 were more like expansion packs or DLC for the game, as they required the original Wizardry in order to play them. We'll see the Famicom ports of those 2 sequels soon enough. And later games in the Wizardry series got ports to other consoles. But Wizardry kind of sputtered out in the mid-90s computer RPG slump and never recovered. while in Japan, Wizardry never stopped. There's around 30 Japanese-exclusive Wizardry games, compared to just 8 core Wizardry games released in the US. And they're really all built on the backbone of this game. This particular port of Wizardry. The Famicom version of Wizardry was one of the big 3 hits of the 1987 holiday season, and its influence is extensive. Besides those sequels, we're going to see a lot of games that take directly from Wizardry. And after getting a few levels under my belt here, I kinda wish that I could keep going with this one. I'm afraid I just don't have the time, but at least those characters will be ready for me when I return.